bringing you a steady stream of thought-provoking ideas and cutting-edge innovation. You're listening to Society and the State. Life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Bryan Hyde.
Welcome, everybody, to Society and the State, Life, Liberty, and Your Pursuit of Happiness. Just as the show intro said, we are very excited for launching this new podcast. This has been a long time coming, as you'll hear about as we get into the why and the what and how we've come to this point. I'm Connor Boyack, and I am one of the show's co-hosts. I am here with
Bryan Hyde.
The Bryan Hyde, no less. In fact, here's a little bit of the backstory. When this was about a couple years ago, I had a website set up. I set up the Facebook and the YouTube and the iTunes to get this podcast going. It was a couple years ago. And life got in the way, other projects got in the way, and I shelved it. It didn't feel like the right time. And for those of you who don't know, I run a free market think tank called Libertas Institute based out of Utah. And, we've done a lot of exciting, successful stuff, some of which we'll talk about in future show episodes, some of the really unique and creative things our team has been successfully doing. But, that sucked up most of my time. And it was, about half a year ago that we hired Bryan and brought him on board. And as he'll tell you here in a minute, he's got a long history in radio where finally it clicked. Finally it made sense, where we dusted off the project. We built this whole little mini studio in the office, and the time is right. And we've got a long list of fun guests to talk about. So, Bryan, why don't you share with our audience kind of your background and what you bring to the team here on Society and the State?
Okay. So I joined Libertas Institute following a 30-year radio career. And along the way, I think it's important to know that I stated categorically at the beginning of that career, I would never do talk radio because I felt like that was just too much work and everybody wanted to be the next Casey Kasem. But fate, of course, heard what I had to say and chuckled as it intervened. And I became a talk show host. I followed the tried and true Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity method of throwing red meat for many years, which, by the way, is a very effective way of generating an audience, but it generates more noise and heat and not a lot of light. And along the way, something clicked, and I realized that there are messages that are worth advocating, liberty being one of them. So I followed Connor. I followed him before he created Libertas. Once he created Libertas, I followed him very closely, and it's just a real honor to be able to bring my passion and my talents to work with him in the cause of liberty. And Connor, you understand this better than most people. Podcasting is an emerging technology that actually has great promise to reach a very vast audience.
Well, and I've been a consumer of podcasts for a while, right? And we'll be talking to some people on this show who have been doing that very successfully, talking to some very interesting guests. And as a longtime consumer of podcasts, it's such a, there's this, asynchronous is the word, where you don't have to tune into Bryan Hyde at 4 p.m. on Monday and be sitting there next to the radio. Asynchronous means you don't have to listen at the same time that we are producing it. That's the great benefit of podcasting. And you can search through and skip over things and find the things that matter to you. And what we're going to be doing here in this show is trying to create a very interesting blend. A lot of shows create this niche, that they fall into. Is it niche? I never know how to pronounce
Say it
word.
with confidence, and it works for me.
Exactly. And so we're going to kind of do a well-rounded blend. And this follows the model that we've done at Libertas. A lot of organizations like ours will get into just, tax reform or education reform, or they'll have just a few issues that they work on. And as you'll hear as we progress later in the show, we work on a wide range of issues. And that's actually been a very strategically smart thing for us to do. And so I think the show is going to reflect kind of a similar broad range of issues. We talk about life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. Society and the state really spans basically everything. It's going to be cultural issues, current events. We're going to talk about political issues. We're going to talk about entrepreneurship and business and marketing. And all of these things blend together in our world. And so let's talk about them in a very broad range. And Bryan, as a fan of your show and as a guest of your show back when you were on radio, you seem to really be able to grasp doing that wide range of issues. How do you feel? Why do you think that that's so important to not just talk narrowly, but to talk broadly about the issues that matter?
Well, as I'm sure you have discovered throughout the years that you have been an advocate for liberty, it's a very multifaceted topic. And, like you say, not everybody has the same focus. There are some people who hyper-focus on one single aspect. And unfortunately, the word for those people is they're ideologues, because that one idea defines the scope of what they're all about.
Sure.
Liberty encompasses a lot more. And so I applaud you for taking that broader approach. And maybe you could shed some insights into what's the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
When people tune into Society and the State, what do you hope happens?
Great question. And after a period of self-reflection, I've come to this. Like I said, this was 2 years coming, and it's always been in the back of my mind. What we want to do is educate, inspire, and motivate. You're going to hear from a lot of very interesting guests on this show who have done a lot of very unique and interesting things. And that's going to be educational. It's going to be informational. Maybe that's not your path. You're not going to go and recreate that same thing. You're going to hear from a lot of people who have changed the world around them, some in really big ways, some in very small ways in their community who nevertheless are inspirational. And then you're going to hear of strategic things and marketing things, tactics, strategies that are going to motivate you to replicate those in your community. We want to empower our listeners, not just to, hey, that was an interesting guest, or, hey, that's relevant in my life, I can become a better person. Sure, there will be some of that. But we want to change the world. That's the business that we're in, changing hearts and minds, changing policy, changing the world. And to do that, you can't just educate, you can't just serve people information. You need to also give them a tool, and you need to show them a path forward. And so it's quite an ambitious goal, but again, for several years, we've been doing this through Libertas Institute, and in our short time of existence, we've done pretty well. And obviously we're still learning, but we want to bring some of those same strategies to bear on this show and create a unique blend. And some episodes are going to be fantastic. Some are perhaps not going to be relevant to you, but the benefit with podcasting is tune in for the ones you want, tune in for all of them. You can customize your experience as you see fit. But Bryan, I think you can see, as someone who saw the work that Libertas is doing from the sidelines, and then in the broader sense of the world, we really have to talk about a whole lot of stuff. We can't just talk about a few things, right?
Absolutely. And like you, I share that vision that it's great to hear things that we agree with. Everybody loves to have, their biases confirmed. Well, yes, that's exactly the way it should be. Glad to hear that people agree with me. But the time when life really takes on meaning is when you hear and then you implement truths that change you as a person, or for that matter, enable you to change the world in some unique way that is yours and yours alone. And hopefully as you tune into this podcast, that's some of the inspiration that's going to come from it.
I think what you guys are going to get from listening to this show is content that you won't be getting in a lot of other places. There's a fantastic podcast out there. Like I say, I've been a consumer of podcasts, but we're going to try and do something a little bit different, have some different guests, different issues, different ideas that perhaps may challenge you to some extent. Maybe they'll be out of left field and it'll, kind of challenge your bias or your previous understanding of an issue. And that's great. Even if you come away disagreeing, you become more well-rounded, you're exposed to something interesting you hadn't heard before. But we're also going to try and expose you to a lot of things that perhaps you haven't considered before, you haven't thought about, and always be tying them back into life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. That's the fundamental, foundation of this show. Is all the guests that we talk to, we're going to be tying it back. How does this impact your life? How does this impact our liberty? How does this make us better enable us in our pursuit of happiness? We're not just going to talk about interesting stuff. We're going to try and show how it's relevant to those issues. Let's talk maybe about the logistics, Bryan, of the show, so people understand what we're going to be doing. The vision that we have right now at the outset is 3 episodes a week. We're going to do 2 guest interviews, and then we'll do one episode per week where it's you and I talking about a current event, a hot topic, a philosophical issue, whatever floats our boat. But we've already got an early list that I think our listeners are going to love. And so 3 episodes a week, probably around 20 to 30 minutes. We don't want to get too long, but we don't want to not be able to get into an issue enough where we can really, chew at it and understand it. And then we're going to keep going from there. And guys, we have a guest list so far that I think is really exciting. And is going to be a lot of fun and all over the place, right? It's not just politics. It's not just business. It's not activism. It's all over the place. And if only one of those issues really matters to you, I think you're going to grow a little bit here, sticking with us in the show. And Bryan, what are your thoughts? I think we have a pretty ambitious goal. How do we pull it off? I
don't want to set the expectations too high because there's a lot of hype out there in the world, and I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. But I will tell you that we've aimed high. Yeah. In terms of the guests and in terms of the topics. This is ambitious, and yet it feels absolutely right. I think you're going to find that though we take very seriously life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness, We also managed to have a great deal of fun along the way. And those of you who know Connor well will know that he is capable of some very wry humor, and I have an irreverent side as well.
That's a good word for it.
These are things that matter. They matter deeply to us, but I don't want you to tune in thinking that, well, it's time for another episode of The Long Faces, bemoaning whatever's wrong in the world. Nope. We have solutions. We have optimism, and I think you're going to find that our guests are among some of the most enlightening and enthusiastic people that you'll hear anywhere.
I'm glad you pointed that out, Brian. That's my observation of the broader liberty movement or the world around us, is that it can be very negative, very critical, and perhaps rightly so, right? I myself was that way years ago. And when I started Libertas Institute, and when my goal became to make a difference and change people's hearts and minds, and therefore change public policy, I realized that negativity and criticism can only go so far. And it's still there. And we can rightly be critical of things. But positivity and humor and kindness and humility, and not that I'm perfect in these things, right? But you have seen, I think, in your own career that when we approach it from that way, we build alliances and friendships, we build relationships that you can then leverage, that common trust to do things where you agree. And I think that's the tone you're going to see on this show. Some very interesting things, some fun and exciting things, but it all gets tied to your pursuit of happiness, not your, humdrum, meek out an existence that is moderately okay. We want to be happy. We want to have a good life, and we want to find the path to get there.
And it's not an opportunity to tell everybody else how wrong they are and beat them over the head with it. I like the idea of you approach people with what you have that's valuable. You plant the seeds. If they accept them, great. If they don't, you plant the seeds with love and give them time to come to terms with it on their own terms. And that's usually what yields the opening of minds that once were closed like a steel trap.
Well, I'm excited for the show. And I think we have, as I said, a long guest list and a lot of fun plans. So we'll cut it here for episode 0. We wanted to do just an introduction so you guys could learn a little bit about us. Obviously, you're going to be hearing a lot more as the show goes forward, and you'll get to know us pretty well. But we have a lot of fun stuff planned for you guys. Like I said, this is 2 years in coming. We've had a lot of time to think about this, and now that Bryan is on our team, we got the right team here to execute it, and we're going to have a bunch of fun. So we hope you stick with us. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you as the show progresses here on Society and the State.
You've been listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.